Hello wonderful person, this is Anton, and today we're going to be looking for extraterrestrial life. So let's say that I want to find a planet that has basically alien life on it. Not really the ET type of life, not the extraterrestrial intelligence, but just typical bacteria that might be visible from space. What would I actually be looking for? Would I be looking for a planet that looks like this? Well, it's just a water world, right? How do I know there's life here? Today we're going to be talking about a relatively recent paper that actually argues that to look for life we have to look for a very specific color, but not the color you see on the screen right now. As a matter of fact, this is probably one of the more common colors you're going to find. There's a very unique color that only life can produce. And today we're going to be talking about purple. Welcome to What the Math. So alright, let's say I'm looking for a planet that potentially has life. Blue planets are definitely out because it's just water, so for all we know, it's a liquid ocean, but we don't really know if there is any life in there. As a matter of fact, it's very likely that this could be a completely empty ocean. What if I were to look at a planet like this, for example? This is a relatively strange brown world, but once again, there's a lot of things that could produce these colors. If I were to look for something that has a combination of colors, once again, very difficult to establish if there's actually life here just by looking at it. And we could kind of keep going, but all of these colors could be explained in non-lifelike conditions. You could actually have these colors without having any life whatsoever. But there is one color, as I said, purple, that actually is very difficult to explain unless it's actually made by life. Now, a few years ago, I actually made a video about purple Earth. It was called Was Earth Once Purple? Where I actually described the idea that many scientists have today that Earth was actually purple because of this bacteria that used to be pretty much everywhere, but was eventually overtaken by, chlorophyll bacteria that produced green color instead, mostly because it was actually more effective. But the purple bacteria still exists today, and you can actually find it in very salty conditions. They are what's known as halophiles. A very recent paper, as I mentioned before, actually did something really interesting. They wanted to see if, let's say you find a purple planet, would it actually be possible to see it from far away? And so what they actually did was pretty clever. They took this bacteria, these halophiles, they put them in the petri dish, and they essentially let them reproduce and basically created cultures, and then put them against white paper and various other colors, and try to simulate what it would be like to look at them as if it was like a planet. And they discovered that, surprisingly, it is actually exceptionally easy to see when these purple bacteria create purple color on those planets. In other words, just to summarize all of this, it's exceptionally easy to identify purple planets. And that means that in reality, if we were to look for life out there in the universe, we really need to start looking for these purple planets, because it's very likely that if these bacteria were created here on Earth, it's also possible that these bacteria were created in other parts of the galaxy, and the only color that is like a giveaway that it's a bacteria and not just a natural phenomenon would be basically purple color, and it just so happens that it's very easy to see. Now, just to give credit to the scientists behind this paper, here's the title and here are the actual authors, but what I really wanted to actually briefly discuss is why I actually strongly believe that purple is really that color that we need to be looking for. And the way I wanted to actually talk about it is, well, okay, so let's imagine we found a purple planet. We actually looked out there and we found an exoplanet that is clearly purple. In other words, it looks something like this. This is just a model I created in Universe Sandbox. How do we know that this is not a natural phenomenon and this is something that is biogenic? This is something that is created by bacteria. And that's really kind of hard to answer at first until you start looking for things out there in nature that are purple. And you'd be surprised to find that pretty much most purple things we have today are essentially synthesized through very, very complex chemical reactions. Very unlikely to happen in real life. So first of all, let's actually talk about all of them, and it's not going to take that long. Let's start with the obvious, purple dye. As you'll find out pretty quickly, purple dye is almost impossible to create by accident. It's a very difficult molecule to create, and this is one of the reasons why purple was always the color of royalty in the ancient times. It was actually very difficult to create. Okay, so purple dye is out of the question. It cannot be possibly, or very unlikely to be possibly created on this particular planet completely by accident. Okay, let's go to the next purple object we have here on Earth. And this actually took me a little bit of research, chemical research specifically, to try to see if it's something viable or not. But basically permanganate solutions, or specifically potassium permanganate. Interestingly, even though it is relatively purple and does create a relatively purple looking solution, it is actually something that is synthesized here on Earth. It's not naturally found anywhere, and it was actually discovered as a kind of a medicinal element. So once again, this is not something we can actually find by accident in nature. Next on the list is a compound that's even more unusual, vanadium chloride. This is actually a toxic compound, and once again, not really found in nature, has to be produced. And as a matter of fact, this one is even more difficult to produce than the compound I just showed you previously. And one of the last things I found that's definitely purple and can technically be found in nature is basically iodine. Now, this is probably the most famous element that's essentially purple. Specifically, iodine gas is actually purple, and in some sense, okay, so maybe there is something that can be purple without any contribution from biogenic or life elements. But here's the thing, iodine is exceptionally rare. As a matter of fact, it is one of the rarest materials on Earth. If we find a planet that's purple because of iodine, in itself, it's actually a tremendous achievement. In other words, if this planet right here was purple because it had so much iodine in it, it's very likely we definitely need to investigate it in more detail. If it's not life, it's something absolutely crazy that's happening here. Iodine is actually one of the rarest halogens. It's actually more rare than so-called rare earths on the planet. And there are only 2 countries in the world that produce enough iodine for basically export, Chile and Japan. There are very few iodine deposits in the world, and it's just so rare that nothing in the world is purple because of iodine naturally. And so, yeah, we are not going to find anything purple on our planet that's purple by itself. You have to have life to create this particular color. As a matter of fact, this creature right here, the mollusk that you see on the screen, is actually one of the most well-known purple dye producers, at least in the ancient world. This is how we used to make purple. But except for this little guy, it's actually relatively difficult to find the sources of this unusual color. So what does it all mean? Well, for one, it means that because of this study, we now have a pretty decent way of discovering life on other planets. If we ever discover a purple planet, it is almost certainly guaranteed that there's some kind of a life event going on here. It's very unlikely to be iodine, and if it's something else, then it's most likely synthetic generation of purple by aliens, actual intelligent aliens. On the other hand, maybe there are still some compounds that could produce purple atmosphere, for example, but we just haven't discovered them yet, and we definitely have not found a way for an entire planet to be actually purple in color. At the same time, stars can also not really be purple, as I mentioned in one of the previous videos, and so this color right here, as of today, is a telltale sign that it's life. If you find purple out there, it's most likely life. And although it's possible that we might be able to discover other spectra of colors that could maybe mean life, it's only this color right now that's a definite sign of life. I'm going to basically stop this here because it's still kind of a hypothesis, but a hypothesis that is definitely based on some solid research. And once we actually identify colors of various exoplanets, specifically using telescopes like the James Webb telescope that you see on the screen right now, that's going to be able to actually distinguish planetary surfaces, we'll hopefully now be able to officially start looking for life on the nearby exoplanets, because this is something that we've been trying to do for the past few decades. And on this note, I'm going to stop this video here and wait for James Webb Telescope to start finding those planets so we can come back and make another video about maybe the first purple planet we discover out there. Until then, come back tomorrow, space out, and as always, bye bye. And do consider subscribing and maybe even supporting this channel on Patreon because it does help me a lot.